Dr. Sean Baker is a renowned figure in medicine, sports, and nutrition. As an orthopedic surgeon, athlete, and advocate for the carnivore diet, he challenges conventional beliefs for optimal health and performance. A former competitive athlete excelling in powerlifting, strongman competitions, and rugby, his athletic achievements combined with medical expertise offer a unique perspective on nutrition's role in well being. Dr. Baker is a leading proponent of the sometimes controversial carnivore diet, emphasizing animal based foods and eliminating plants. Through personal experience and extensive research, he champions his dietary approach for health, body composition, and athletic performance. Hi, Sean, and welcome to Revita Fest. I'm so excited to have you back at the festival as one of our incredible speakers and a pioneer in the field of carnivore. And so, my first question for you is, many people associate health benefits with a balanced and varied diet that includes fruit and vegetables and whole grains. How does the carnivore diet challenge this conventional wisdom, and what evidence supports its potential to improve overall health?
Well, I think when we're looking at the so-called recommendations, what they're really doing is telling us to eat whole, kind of more or less unprocessed foods, as a basic recipe. And what a carnivore diet does is it recreates that very, very effectively. In fact, probably as effective as any diet out there. But we're doing it in the context of a so-called maybe a whole food animal-based diet. We hear a lot about whole food plant-based diets, which ideally will eliminate all the hyper-processed, kind of food-like substances that so many people consume. We're doing that. The same thing with animal products. And when you say what evidence is there to support it, well, I mean, there are many, many, many. I mean, I'm talking about tens of thousands of people who have now done this and very convincingly have shown, just incredible health improvements across the board. I mean, this is something that is undeniable. I mean, there's people that deny it, but it's pretty much undeniable. So we're seeing that all the time. There are, additionally, there are now a handful of studies in the literature that have looked at this. Harvard University did one in 2021. There's been 3 or 4 different write-ups and different articles. There's been several case reports. There are more in progress right now as we speak, and so that is there. Also, we've got a decent amount of historical record of populations that ate largely this diet, with maybe slight modifications, but clearly very animal focused diets, and they generally were believed to be without significant chronic disease, at least when we observe them. Now most of those populations have kind of adopted the Western diet, and everybody's sick like everybody else.
Absolutely. I mean, it's just fascinating that this carnivore diet spans so much longer than the sad American diet that's making everyone so sick, and that it's so hard for people to buy into this very whole-based diet. So my second question is that critics argue that a carnivore diet lacks essential nutrients found in plant-based food. How do you address the potential deficiencies and long-term implications of a solely animal-based diet?
Well, I mean, as far as deficiencies are concerned, deficiencies have, clear acute effects, and we've not seen any of those. For one of the biggest criticism is vitamin C deficiency, because, meat, according to the USDA, I think, has little to no vitamin C. However, it wasn't really fully tested. So there actually is some vitamin C in meat, but it's still not a lot. But no one is getting scurvy, and this is something. Scurvy is water soluble. Vitamin C is a water soluble vitamin, and so it doesn't hang around very long. And so you would expect to start seeing signs and symptoms of scurvy within about a month, a month to a couple months. And there are people who have been doing this for not only years but decades with no signs of scurvy. So I think that alone is just pretty significant evidence. In fact, we've known since when they explored the North and South poles. The explorers found that if they had access to fresh meat, scurvy was both cured and prevented from that. So we don't see any acute signs of deficiencies. The other thing is, we have to realize that all of the RDAs and all the so-called serum levels of what we think is supposed to be normal, again, all those population norms were studied and based upon populations that eat 60% carbohydrates, and a bunch of that being grain, and those things have different impacts on our ability to absorb nutrition. They have different impacts on our requirements for nutrition. So, I mean, at the end of the day, I can't tell you the 50-year effect on this because no one really knows outside of human evolution. I mean, we can look at the evolutionary model and say, yes, there are clear evidence that humans ate, at least for significant portions of our existence in different parts of the world, very meat-based diets, and we continue to thrive as a species and reproduce and all those types of things. So the long-term stuff, no one really knows with any diet. I mean, there's just no way to do those studies accurately. You know, it's just impossible to lock people up in a metabolic ward and study them for the course of their life, and you know, watch them only eat, you know, this or that. So I've seen, you know, no significant signs of any kind of deficiencies on this diet, outside of, you know, every once in a while you'll see somebody with a low folate on their labs, but they don't have any clinical symptoms or signs. You know, low folate is often associated with macrocytic anemia, different sort of skin manifestations, and we don't typically see those things. And so again, the question is, what are normal lab values on this diet versus a standard American diet? And I think they're very different, or in some aspects. And so, but we're just not seeing any overt clinical signs or symptoms of deficiency states. In fact, we're seeing the exact opposite. We're seeing, the opposite of being deficient would be sufficient and doing well. And we just see people doing well over and over again.
Absolutely. And we briefly discussed this in a podcast interview, but the Harvard study, I know I keep coming back to this. You were you played a big role in recruiting participants, correct, for that study. Can you just talk us through the results and what they found?
Yeah, so David Ludwig, who is a well-respected researcher at Harvard University in the field of nutrition, he's an MD. He was a senior author on this. Belinda Lennertz was the primary author, and they recruited just over 2,000 people into the study, and they basically, had them send in lab work, just fill out all of the stuff that they've been doing for the last several years. I mean, the participants range from people that have been doing the diet a minimum of 6 months all the way up to 28 years. And, basically what they found was, by and large, dramatic improvements in health across the board. In particular, they looked at a number of the lab values that they had lab data on. They looked at, for instance, diabetes reversal, and they saw just a tremendously significant number of people coming off all medications, including insulin for the type 2 diabetics, most of the oral medications, 100% of the other injectable drugs like the SGLT2 inhibitors and the GLP-1 agonists and things like that. They were able to get off all of those and put their disease into remission with that. And so I think that's a big step. There is another, so that's an observational study. It's not a true intervention trial. We have an intervention trial, which we are currently getting off the ground to look at the very same question. We're going to take a group of diabetics and a group of non-diabetics. One group will do carnivore, one will do standard of care, and we'll just compare the outcome at the end. And hopefully it'll show what the Harvard study showed, which I think it will, but we'll just have to see once that study's been done. That's really interesting. How big? What is the size of that study? Oh, it's probably going to be about 50 people. I think it's not, because it's we're recruiting people to having a control group, having a study group. We have to pay for all the food. We have to do order the lab. So it's quite expensive. It's probably going to cost $250,000 to do that study. So that is that's the next in the evolution in this sort of process. Oh, I look forward to seeing the results, because I think we all know what they're going to show, but it's great to have the research to back up that this works and that it works so well because it's so simple and effective. Another thing that often comes out is that carnivores' impact on gut health and the microbiome, which it's supposedly thrives on dietary fiber. How do you address the importance of fiber and its potential role in maintaining a healthy digestive system when people are following carnivore? I would certainly say that fiber is conditionally beneficial. It's clearly not necessary. I mean, if it was, I would be dead a long time ago. I don't consume fiber, and haven't done so for, close to 7 years. And so I think what we're seeing is that, some of the purported benefits of fiber with regard to gut microbiome and what the microbiome produces. One particularly common claim made is it produces short chain fatty acids like butyrate. And butyrate sounds a whole lot like beta hydroxybutyrate, which is what we get when we go into ketosis. And so the cells that benefit from butyrate most likely also benefit from beta hydroxybutyrate because they're very interchangeable. They're only one hydroxyl molecule away, and they're very easily interconvertible. So I think what happens is any benefit you might get from short chain fatty acids in the gut from fiber, you also get those same exact benefits from having a more fat-based metabolism, which is what occurs in the absence of carbohydrates. So I don't think there's any real major detriment from the loss of this particular feature of digesting or breaking down fiber. And in fact, most people that go on this diet, including people with things like irritable bowel syndrome or inflammatory bowel disease like Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis, very often see their gut function, return to normal, where they don't have all these symptoms, pain and bloating and bleeding and things like that, which we see very commonly with these things. So gut health in a general sense, both objectively and subjectively, generally improves on a carnivore diet pretty much across the board. There's a transition phase, which might last a couple of weeks for some people, but once you kind of have kind of adapted to the diet, I mean, the gut health seems to be really good. And I would argue, it's interesting because a lot of us are used to eating and then having a little bit of bloating and a little indigestion and, and gas and things like that. And we consider that normal digestive function. I don't consider that normal. I think that's maladaptation. I think that's either you're eating the wrong food or your gut is, there's something wrong with your gut. And so we generally see that stuff going away on carnivore, which, generally points to healthy gut function. If you're not having symptoms and you're free of pain. I've also seen a number of people who have had their microbiome analyzed on carnivore, and they tend to have pretty good diversity. I've seen ulcerative colitis patients who have gone from the 5th percentile, very, very bottom, all the way up to the 95th percentile by going carnivore as far as gut diversity goes. So I think those claims about carnivore is going to somehow negatively impact your gut microbiome are just kind of made up. We're not seeing that in actual practical, in actual real world terms.
Yeah. The other thing that I've picked up a lot on is this notion, and I heard a naturopath mentioning it in a video the other day, that optimally you have to have 3 bowel movements a day. And I was kind of horrified. So, there's this, just moving on from the fiber conversation, is that normal to expect that?
So, I mean, I think it's pretty well accepted in the literature that normal human bowel frequency is somewhere between 3 times a day to 3 times a week. And so that's considered well within the norm for anybody. So there's no sort of magic prize at the end of life for having the most bowel movements. In fact, there was a nice study that Ann Peary did in one of the gastroenterology journals several years back, where she actually looked at people that were consuming lots of fiber and having lots of bowel movements, and she compared them to the people that were having less fiber and less bowel movements, and looking at them on colonoscopy. And what she found was the people that had the most bowel movements and ate the most fiber actually had the highest incidence of something called diverticulosis, which is, these outpotching, breakdowns of the large intestine, which later, have particles trapped in there, and it turns into diverticulitis. And so there's actually potentially some negative for having all these, multiple bowel movements all the time. So I'd say that there's literature that actually goes directly against that notion.
So switching gears a little bit, obviously the carnivore diet promotes a high consumption of animal products, which raises a lot of ethical and environmental concerns for people. How do you reconcile the impacts of this diet on animal welfare and sustainability with the perceived health benefits?
Well, I mean, first of all, if you accept there are health benefits, and I would strongly argue there are, so you've got to think we've got to eat something. I mean, humans have to eat something. There is no diet out there that is that avoids, animal death. I mean, that's a part of life. I mean, even the most veganist diet is still going to kill countless number of small animals. And as we grow crops for agriculture, whether it's corn, wheat, strawberries, tomatoes, avocados, fruit in the trees, we kill literally in the United States alone 4 quadrillion, not billion, not trillion, but quadrillion insects every year poisoned to death by pesticides. And the downstream effect is that the animals that live on those insects often die as well. Entire ecosystems are wiped out to plant these crops. So is that any better than a cow that lives in a, very comfortable existence, and then, eventually goes to slaughter. But I mean, it's, I don't have any ethical qualms about the way I eat. I think that, realizing that there's no magic, unless you eat rocks, which we can't survive on rocks. But if you consume food, you're doing that at the cost of animals, either directly or indirectly. And in many cases, if your diet is just large grazing ruminant animals like a cow, particularly depending on how it's been reared, if it's been raised in sort of a quote unquote regenerative array, then there's very minimal death. It's much lower as far as animal death is concerned compared to a standard American diet or even a vegetarian or vegan diet. And in fact, the deaths that often occur in association with some of these plant-based diets are, animals are poisoned to death, left in the field to rot. I mean, they may spend 2 or 3 days slowly dying. Is that more ethical than, putting an animal down in a millisecond, which happens during routinely through, cow processing and slaughterhouse? I mean, those animals are stunned and rendered unconscious within a millisecond or two, and then they're dead. And so they don't even consciously know they're dying. Whereas an animal that's been sprayed a pesticide or, or shot to death or whatever is going to sit there and suffer for days, sometimes days on end, and that to me is more problematic from that aspect.
Yeah, I mean, I agree completely. So, as humans evolved to be omnivores, consuming a wide variety of foods, how do you respond to the argument that the carnivore diet goes against our natural dietary adaptations and may neglect important nutritional components for overall health? I know we have touched on this briefly, but just in summary, with people being so concerned that only eating animal products is going to make them anemic, how do they get started? What is like the first step in getting started on a carnivore diet? Just very basic, practical information.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think to answer your first question, I think humans are opportunistic omnivores, so we'll eat what's available to us. And I think we're also at the same time facultative carnivores, which means we tend to thrive on meat. So if we have the highest quality nutrition, which is meat, we're gonna thrive on that. But fortunately, we do have sort of this backup capacity to consume other foods, and obviously many of us do that. Throughout, most of us do that. Most of us eat in an omnivorous way. I mean, a carnivore diet, I use it as a treatment protocol. I mean, this is an intervention. This is something to help people get healthier. Whether you decide to make that a lifestyle or not is a different, is up to you, and it's a different thing. And so I first and foremost want to let people know this is a way to perhaps regain your health. And so how do you get started on this? Well, I mean, obviously it's pretty simple. Eat a bunch of meat. I mean, you can do steak and eggs or something like that. The way I started, which worked pretty well for me, is I just did it one meal at a time. I would say, tomorrow for breakfast, I'm just going to have bacon and eggs, and I'm not going to have any toast or juice or muesli or whatever the normal stuff we have. And that went pretty well. I was like, well, that was pretty good, and I felt pretty good. And then, the next day I did 2 meals, and then the next day I did 3 meals, and then I did 2 days, and then I did 3 days, and then I did a week, and then I did 2 weeks. And that's a pretty nice way to do it, because you can just kind of get used to not having those extra, things on the plate. And you'll be surprised how satisfied you actually become, because you're like, wow, I'm just not hungry at this meal for the first time in a while. And you just stop thinking about food so much, because you really start to experience what it means to be truly satiated, truly nourished. Now you got to eat a little more. I mean, if the normal size helping for you is 2 eggs, you might eat 6 eggs, and you just kind of eat enough because you're not eating those other foods. And then all of a sudden you start to, over time, you develop a real hunger for that, because you're like, wow, that my body really liked that. And so you start to crave it a little more. But that's a way, that's a way to ease into it. I think, people that have a lot of health problems, you have to do it with caution, because, if they're on a lot of medications, some of those medications, particularly diabetic meds, if you're taking a bunch of, glucose lowering medications and you go on a carnivore diet, those medications are going to overwhelm you, and you're going to end up hypoglycemic. So you have to sometimes work with a physician or a healthcare provider to help guide you in that situation. But I think for most people, it's just, a little bit of just slowly transitioning in. There's people, some people are suffering from food addiction, might have to go a little harder core, because it's all these sort of triggering foods. It's kind of like going from as you've got experience with sugar addiction, but like an alcoholic, and just saying, hey, you're an alcoholic, why don't you just try to drink once a week? It doesn't work very well in many cases. So some people have to really go in all in. But most people can kind of do this little bit of transition and just get used to, that sort of approach.
I love that. So, I'm a huge fan of the carnivore diet and I do go back to it often. And one of the greatest benefits that it had in my life, and we've spoken a lot about, diabetics and just chronic diseases that, that you can measure quite tangibly, but mental health. So I know when I'm feeling down or I'm going in a place that's a little bit dark or I'm feeling out of sorts, that getting back on the carnivore diet is going to be the best diet for me to just soothe myself in that way. So there are many claims that I have read online that the carnivore diet has profound effects on mental health, such as improved mood and reduced anxiety, and also even like enhanced cognitive function. Can you shed light on the potential mechanisms by which the carnivore diet does this? And also, if you have any like evidence, and we can end on this, or anecdotal experiences or stories that you've come across your platform to share, I think that would be a nice way to end this.
Yeah, well, I mean, clearly nutrition has a significant role in our mental health. I mean, our brain is an organ just like our liver, just like our heart. It requires nutrition, and the nutrition we feed it has an impact on how it functions. And, as we have, depression, anxiety, bipolar disorder, ADHD, of course, neurocognitive disorders, Alzheimer's and things like that are all impacted by its physiology, and physiology is impacted by nutrition. And so what we see is, we know there are things that cause, say, for instance, increased gut hyperpermeability. The barrier between our gut, what's in the gut, and what gets into our into our bloodstream is there. And when that becomes hyperpermeable, or the so-called leaky gut syndrome, we see other membranes. So we have a blood-brain barrier. Same thing happens when we have a leaky gut. We have a leaky blood-brain barrier. So that can also cause problems. That can lead to neuroinflammation, so inflammation of the brain. We also see that the energy that goes into the brain, is also subject to the same problems that we are in the rest of our tissues, primarily things like insulin resistance. And so we know that our brain will utilize different fuel sources, glucose, ketones, things like that. And when the brain is not accessing energy correctly due to perhaps insulin resistance, that can lead to a dysfunction. We know that there's a lot of nutrients that are important for brain health, things like creatine and carnosine, carnitine, all of which are primarily only found in animal products. Also things like cholesterol, which is only found in animal products. Remember, our brain is composed of, 25% of the cholesterol in our body is found in our brain. Our brain is mostly just a big blob of fat for the most part. And it's highly, highly dependent upon adequate fat in the diet, I believe. There are, just a number of, things that impact that the diet all has an impact on. And so from what I've seen, I mean, I routinely, this is one of the most common things I see are mental health issues, because mental health issues have become so prevalent and so common these days. 1 in 4 people in the United States is currently diagnosed with a mental health disorder, 1 in 4. So, and most of them are medicated. And there's probably more that haven't been diagnosed yet. So we see it's such a common problem. So any problem that's really common, when you fix the nutrition, you fix the diet, will get better. So I cannot tell you, I've got hundreds, if not thousands of, anecdotes of people where they're no longer depressed or no longer have anxiety. Their bipolar disorder has gotten better. Their PTSD gets better. Their ADHD gets better. Their addictions often get better, because, addiction is also one of these kind of brain diseases. And so we just see that stuff over and over. And, you're probably familiar with a guy named Chris Palmer, who wrote this book, Brain Energy. It's very similar. And I've been talking to Chris for years, and we've been seeing the same things. Just people get better when you fix their nutrition, and it's such a critically important part. And it's interesting because people, up until even today, but even up until very recently, no one was talking about nutrition in the brain. We thought it was stigmatized. No, it had to be trauma. It had to be nutrition. Has nothing to do with this, when in fact it has a huge impact on recovery from all these issues.
Oh, I love that. Well, I think that's a beautiful way to end, that so much of the power to heal ourselves, our bodies, and our brains lies with us. And often it just takes a very simple step and a slight lifestyle modification to get optimal benefits. So thank you so much for being a speaker at RevitaFest. We appreciate your participation so much.
Oh, Karin, thanks for having me, and good luck to you. And hopefully this this turns out well.
Perfect.